Hello and welcome to Morgan Latif Presents Coaching You Through Crisis. I'm Sam Latif, co-founder and director of Morgan Latif and your host. And this week my guest is Dr. Neslyn Watson-Druée. Dr. Neslyn is an accomplished author in personal development and a renowned international speaker. She brings over 30 years in leadership coaching and has won over 25 awards for her work in the field. She works with leaders both in the public and the private sector to really help them find their inner light and their inner strength, as she puts them, to help them both professionally and personally. Most notably, she became chairwoman of the NHS in Kingston. She had a fascinating journey throughout for her work in the NHS, she was also awarded the MBE for nursing leadership and the CBE for health service innovation. We actually talked through her journey and really understand a little bit about how that experience was for her, and link that to the topic that she also wants to discuss with us today, which is dealing with vulnerability. And she really gives us some good advice of how she used that to really find her own resilience and grit to sort of achieve the things that she achieves. So it's a fascinating conversation, and as always, I hope you find it valuable. So let's get into it. Good morning, Neslyn. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Good morning. Wonderful to be with you. Yes, looking forward to having a good time with you today.
Well, look, I appreciate your time, and you know, you have a really fascinating career. Typically at the beginning of the show, I always ask a little bit about how you've been dealing with the lockdown, but I actually wanted to spend a little bit more time with you in particular, going through your career. I said you, I mentioned it in the introduction, but I wanted us to firstly go through a little bit about what your journey has been like from a professional perspective.
Yes, and it has been an exciting journey. I came to England in 1969 to enter nurse education and to be trained as a nurse, and to return to Jamaica as a public health nurse, which is what we call health visitors here. And in the requirements in Jamaica, in order to be a public health nurse, one also had to have at least a minimum of 2 years midwifery experience. And so the journey continued for me. I've had a wonderful life as a nurse, as a midwife, health visitor, and then health promotion officer. And at the point at which I was ready to return to Jamaica, I met Peter, my husband, and of course the rest of that is history, as one can understand. And so after several years as a health promotion officer and then newly married, I decided that perhaps if children were to come along, it would be easier to have more flexible career opportunities. And so I retrained as a teacher. Of course, children never came along. I stayed in education for 8 years. And then I returned to the health service. I returned to the health service as a senior nurse manager for continuing education. And that was a wonderful time. I had the opportunity where I applied for a post, and the HR director telephoned and said, "Neslyn, there's good news and bad news. Which do you want first?" I said, "Okay, well, give me the bad and we'll finish with the good." And she said, "The bad news is we won't be employing you for the job for which you have applied. But the good news is we want to employ you, and these are the parameters. Write the job description and tell us how much to pay you."
Right. Wow.
You know, it's just so wonderful. Absolutely. Yeah. I felt as if I was walking on water. Very successful within that post. After about 2.5 years, a new manager came in. It was a joint appointment between the health service and education. And a new manager came in and said, "Neslyn, I find you threatening because you're Black, you're a woman, you're intelligent, and I'm going to block you." And at the time, you know, if you've ever felt as if your bottom had dropped out of your personal bucket, that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah,
but, you know, looking back, it was a gift. Because from there, I went on to started my own business. I recognized that I was much too intelligent to be going around into the courts with her. And so I decided I would go and be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know the meaning of the word entrepreneurism, as it were. But I have been blessed. I have been really blessed. I developed a leadership development program for the National Health Service executive. And what is it that drove me to do that? I thought, what if this manager, if she had real leadership development, if she understood leadership, how would she have treated me? Would she have been the same? Would she have, would she have treated me differently? And so I decided to really put my energy and to understand what is it that makes a good leader. And so I developed this leadership demonstration program for the National Health Service executive, and it ran as a demonstration program from 1993 to 2006. Blessed to say that my work formed the foundations of the NHS Institute, which then developed into the NHS Leadership Academy. So during that stage of running leadership development programs, I also ran career and personal development programs for 22 of the multinationals in London, including the BBC. I developed a mentoring program for BBC Network Radio, and my work just blossomed. For the leadership development program, I got the MBE for nursing leadership, and for that leadership development program, for the career development and personal development program, I received a national training award from the Government Office of London. And so, Sam, I have been so blessed. I have been so blessed. And highly favored, I can say.
And look, I mean, it said it's been a fascinating journey, and I think this is why I sort of wanted to deep dive a bit more into it in our conversation. And I mean, you already touched upon it there a little bit about the prejudices that you faced at the beginning, but I was again interested to understand in the leadership positions you had, and especially when in the initial throes of your leadership career, particularly as a woman and a woman of color. I mean, what were the kind of challenges you were facing? I mean, how did you overcome those as well?
Well, the challenges, it always appeared as if one had to work much, much harder. It was very difficult to be noticed, as it were. And so, having recognized that, I think I have always taken the opportunity that in everything that I do, I will be my best. I will absolutely be my best, and I will put all the energy in it to be so. I also learned that it is at an early stage how important it was to develop good networks. And I found that, yes, there is prejudice in the world, and I experienced that, but there's also a lot of love. And so I focus on the positive. So, there's a universal law that says what you focus on expands. There are always people who are going to be prejudiced, but something, Sam, I'm not going to give them my energy. I am going to focus on what matters, the people who appreciate me, the people who love me, the people with whom I can work. They are the people that matter, and that's where I put my focus. And I say that now, within my coaching, I still get the stories of prejudice, not only from people of color, women. I work primarily in the civil service, and women, some of the women, depending on their stories, they will say, it's hard to be noticed. And I said, it's so important that you have sponsors, you have a wider network. And it's also important that you know your skills, you know your abilities, and you are able to sell it. So what I learned was really how to market myself and market myself effectively.
Yeah. And it seems like you killed them with kindness, really, right? I mean, the only way to sort of respond with somebody that has that negativity is you kind of have to outweigh that with positivity. And I think we know yours has a happy story, and I think, as you said, you faced those levels of discrimination, but you worked harder to overcome that. But again, in that career that spans a number of years, did you see because now we're dealing, it seems like the conversation continues to be these continued systemic and institutional, not just racism, but also discrimination is set against women. There's a gender pay gap. Did you see that there has been progress from when you started your career? And again, you rightly said it there, that somebody quite clearly said to you, we don't want to give you the role because you're a woman and you're Black. Do you feel that as your career progressed, things have progressed? Do you think that there's also an element of that things are developing, and given what you've seen in both the public and the private sector?
Yes, things have developed, but you know something, we know that there are 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards.
Mm-hmm.
3 steps forward and 1 step backward until there's no step backwards. So
Yeah.
that's how it is. But let me share a story with you, and I won't say in which post this happened, but so I found myself in a very senior position, the leader of the organization, like that. Okay, there was a very intelligent accountant who had very, very high capabilities. However, the people within the organization felt that they couldn't fully understand him, and they would say things like, when he presents himself, you can't fully understand. But it was only his accent. His technical skills were brilliant, and his accent was not that difficult if you're really listening. So, cut a long story short, there was the opportunity for him to become the head accountant, as it were. And when I spoke with some of the others, I recognized that he was not going to get the job. And so with my own, when you talked about killing people with kindness, with my own personal money, I ensured that I gave him a number of psychometric tests, and gave him feedback from that, and actually sent him off to see a coach to prepare him, because I certainly couldn't prepare him, it wouldn't be right, to prepare him for an interview. And cut a long story short, he got the job. And it was one of the best things that actually happened for the organization, because he transformed how things were done, and he actually transformed outcomes. So I don't know what you will take from that. I do feel that we are not yet there within our organizations, private and public. I do feel that we need to have wide diversity at the top. We need, and people who really understand others in different ways, because when you have a whole team of people who are all the same, there will always be blind spots.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I've made sufficient sense of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, again, we're an executive search firm, and we know that, I think we're seeing this shift change of, again, people really, hopefully really enacting real change when it comes to diversity, and trying to readdress that balance. Because also there's scientific evidence that definitely suggests that when you have different viewpoints from different perspectives of just life, that people come up with better solutions, in that perspective. And you also, I mean, the NHS now, for example, is an example of all these nationalities. I mean, it's a public health institution in the UK, but it brings together all these different nationalities. And only now we're really appreciating it in the UK, but again, it's well known across the world. But I was curious to understand also, again, from your experience, right? You've been reach leadership positions in the NHS. Is there any lessons of how the NHS has brought to, and it's a huge organization with, again, there's no doubt it has its issues, but also you see the appreciation people have for it now following this issue with Corona. Do you think there's any lessons that I think the private sector can take from the NHS when it comes to leadership, for example, in the private sector?
To some extent, because the NHS still hasn't got it right as yet. The NHS has done a lot of work in terms of race development. The policies are there. Is the implementation there in every organization? No. But the fact still remains that the NHS is outstanding in terms of its leadership in saying, you know, race matters, equality matters, and it has the policies and structures to deal with it. But again, it comes down to individual organizations. Do you have the leadership within the organizations to implement it? Because, you know, the organization is only going to be as good as the leadership, as it were. And you and I know that when we look worldwide on all the most successful companies, have diversity in its very widest sense. Complete.
Absolutely. And I was also interested to know, because you performed a turnaround in the NHS where, again, you were given this leadership position and people didn't really, I remember when we talked before, they really didn't think you would be able to turn that organization around, and you turned a profit. I wanted to see if you could tell us the story a little bit about how that occurred and why people didn't believe you could do it, and then how you ended up doing that afterwards.
Well, okay, so here we are. We actually found ourselves in financial difficulties, and again, the leadership is very important there, isn't it? So, and one moment, say today is a Friday, we have our board meeting, and at the board meeting, the financial information and everything certainly was in order. You know, I went off, and the chief executive rang me by the Monday to say, we are in financial difficulties. We have a £6 million deficit. So, you know, so how did we end up with a £6 million deficit between Friday and Monday? It meant that there were parts of the organization that was keeping two ledgers. The ledger that came, the financial information that came to the board was different to the financial information that went somewhere else. So, of course, you can recognize that actually heads had to roll. Okay, so, and it was a time when once you are in difficulty, every day the interest keep rising, and so a £6 million deficit became a £21.5 million deficit. So at this point where it was, say, in its 20s then, changing things around, the whole point is, as we know, the minds that created the problems, it won't be the minds that actually solve it.
Yeah,
so
it's like that in a lot of things.
I dismissed the whole board, and so appointed a new board, and a brilliant chief executive with whom I could work, and who also had he was also an accountant, and also had good commissioning experience. So he was just the right person actually, and it was his first chief executive post, and you know, appointed the right set of non-executives. And I remember saying to the board, this new board, no, we will turn this around within 2 years. And they said, no, it can't be done. But I said, you know, I said, okay. And the whole point about the leader, a leader actually has to have the vision and really hold that vision. I said, okay, I am not the person here with the financial skills, but I do know that if what I want you to do is to create a dashboard for me that me as a non-financial person can actually understand. And we will keep a very close eye on this dashboard. We will hold the vision. We will work towards restructuring our services, redeveloping our services in the highest and best ways, and also aiming for all of our services to be better. And we did it, and we did it in 2 years, and end up with a profit at the ending of the 2 years. So I think the key lesson for me in leadership is, don't listen to the naysayers. When people say it can't be done, hold the vision, because you know, the universe, once you say yes to life, once you say yes to the universe will find all the ways to support you to achieve it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that also leads us nicely into what kind of the broader topic of what you want to discuss was the vulnerability, and how would we deal with vulnerability, because I think that also requires leaders, but I think everyone in general, to sort of, you know, kind of hold strong in times where we feel kind of the external environment sort of, you know, pushing down on us. And none more so, I said, that at the moment, not only with the global pandemic that is still going on, but again, just being kicked in the gut again with the kind of same racial and systemic issues that we've been talking about, it seems like, for decades. Firstly, I wanted to talk about, I mean, for you, why was it important to address this topic about vulnerability? What do you think is the value of understanding vulnerability also in leaders today?
Vulnerability for me is very much about that opportunity, that strength to bounce back, the resilience to bounce back from difficulties, from stress, from adversities, and so it's needed today. That resilience to bounce back, and I recognize that we're all vulnerable. The current situation that we have in terms of the virus is no respecter of persons, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're all very vulnerable, and how we cope with vulnerability will depend on our personality, will depend on our skills, our experiences, our resources. So a whole host of things. We're right there in the matrix of things. And it's important for leaders to recognize that people are vulnerable, whether you're in the public, private, or voluntary sector organizations. Leaders need to recognize that vulnerability. So even if we were to take a small slice of it, so most of us are working from home. Some people have better environmental conditions from which to work, and others, it's a squeeze. Even when, listening to the broadcast on radio, you hear some of the presenters say, oh yes, I'm in my office up in the attic, and so, something like that, and so, and if you have a young family, and you had the infrastructure of the nurseries, or even help in the home, whichever way, but how do you do a full-time job with a young family at home? And especially if you don't have a garden, and if the house isn't large, so we have all those complexities that we're dealing with. People are dealing with very complex lives, and it takes a toll on mental health.
So one thing I also wanted to ask is that, should we internalize this feeling of vulnerability, and then again work within ourselves to then make ourselves more resilient? Or is this something that we can also externalize, be vocal about, speak to our friends or leader or managers or whoever it is that we have around us, so that we can also help in again turning that feeling into one that pushes us forward and allows us to be, as I said, more gritty and forceful with getting the things that we want? What is your suggestion around that?
We do both. You work from the inside out, and so that's one part of it. And the second part of it is you articulate out in your external environment. You ask for what you want, you express, because it's no point just bottling things up. You also need to be engaged and engage verbally, engage in asking for what you want, saying, I need help, or this isn't working for me, this I need this to be redesigned or whatever. So putting it out there is very important. So you notice how the country really shifted. I'm talking about here in UK, when Prince Andrew, when the royal family, members of the royal family started to talking about mental health. People then became much more vocal. Organizations and the charitable organizations were very thankful, that, Prince Harry was talking about his own vulnerabilities. So yes, we need to articulate it. We need to ask for help. And we also need work from the inside out, because it's the work from the inside out that builds our personal resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you see it now, right? I think, again, if you look at people that might be considered more vulnerable in certain situations, like, again, people of color, women, now that people are discussing topics around race, gender relations, etc., there seems to be a little bit more awareness, and people are now more comfortable with saying, look, this is not something I feel comfortable with. And then they're addressing change to enact that, right? Do you feel like that there's also, I don't know, is there also specific advice? Because it's not just, again, for those that are kind of quote unquote more vulnerable than others, but it's about everybody having a consensus that when people do feel more vulnerable than others, that we should address it to make it a little bit more of an environment where people can seek help and, again, seek out solutions. But is there anything specific that you also recommend, again, just given the myriad of organizations you've seen, both public and private, in terms of what organizations can do to build out an environment that allows for people to speak and be aware of these kind of issues?
Yes, I do believe that the leadership within the organization need to be very clear about what do they want the organization and the company, how do they want the organization and the company to be? What is the major purpose of that organization and that company? How do they want it to be? And then to think about the skills and that they need. And so then once you decide on the skills that you need to actually take the organization to the pinnacle of where it needs to go, is then to appreciate the divine feminine and the divine masculine. It's so, we talk about equality, and I passionately believe in equality, and equality is about getting that complement, getting it right, so because Sam, when I look at you and I can actually see the divinity within you, and you can appreciate the divinity within me, and then we have an understanding of what is it we are in this organization to build and to achieve and to deliver and to accomplish, then it's a different conversation. So we see a lot that is happening here now in terms of worldwide about Black Lives Matter, and so you'll get pushed back against that. I want to see the utopia. I don't know when we'll get there, but I want to see the day when we are appreciative of the other, and the gender is not the issue, and the color of the skin is not the issue. The issue is, what are we here to create and to co-create? What are we here to aspire to? That's where I want the conversation to be. I want the inequalities to be identified and addressed, and I want us to begin to see the divinity within the other. And that will only come from having a love of self and then a love of the other. I can't appreciate you until I appreciate myself. I can't love you until. So within this matrix that we are in, where there is such a lot of self-hate, when we look at the way, you know, you have to have the perfect body, you have to have the perfect this and the perfect that, the subliminal message is, don't like yourself. I probably am taking it in a different way, but
Yeah.
that's just part of my being as well.
Yeah. No, look, I think overall, you know, if the message is for people to sort of allow them to be themselves more at work, I think that's also certainly a fair and certainly a very ideal suggestion for everyone, right? Because I think sometimes people feel like they have to, and again, if you look at minorities and again, or other people that I think go into a workplace and they feel they have to fit a certain mold. I mean, you get hired for who you are, and you should be able to do a job comfortable with who you are. And if you can do that job, that should be that's the criteria, right? You have to be able to get along with everybody. So I think overall the message which I get is one that we should be able to be ourselves, and leaders should promote people being themselves and being respectful of one another, and being able to appreciate the person who's next to you regardless of race, creed, or color.
And sexuality, you know, because, and you know, love is love.
Yeah.
You know, why should I judge a person who expresses a love for his or her own gender? You know, love is love, cosmic love supreme. If we were all practicing cosmic love supreme, you know, we would get rid of all the trauma, we would get rid of all the difficulties. So, you know, love is love.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again,
Greatest power.
that's a message that's also hard to filter down when it
Yeah.
goes across a number of different organizations.
Mm.
But I think overall, you know, I do feel more positive about the future because you see young people standing up. I said not just for race, but as you said, equal rights regardless of gender, sexuality, even like you know, age, or you know, there's loads of I think issues that I think people that are in the new generation that are being made aware, regardless of obviously some of the downfalls of what we think of technology, etc. So I think overall, I think I would be positive in that those changes will come. I want to also then just finish off with maybe what also is your kind of final takeaways. I think particularly not just for those that are again dealing with a certain level of vulnerability in these times, but I think for everyone in general, just given the times where there's going to be again huge societal change that I think or that occurs because of what's going on in the world right now. What is your suggestion to leaders in particular to really help bring or kind of embrace this kind of wave of change that's coming?
So what would I say to leaders to embrace the change that is coming? I'd say to leaders, have a vision for an inspiring future. And actually having that vision for that inspiring future, I think I would just quote Joel Baker, the futurist, who says, you know, vision without action is only a dream. Action without vision passes the time. But action with vision can change the world. So what do you aspire to? And what is the shared vision for the organization, for your company? And based on that shared vision, then take action. And so if we coming back to something that we spoke about issues of equality, and we said, you know, what could others learn from the NHS? You know, to have the right policies is not enough. To have the policies and take action on the policies and monitoring what is working and addressing what is not working, that is actually true leadership. So walk the talk.
Right. Well, perfectly said. I think, again, that's a great way to end it. Neslyn, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciated listening about your story and again, your advice, particularly I said on dealing throughout these times and these vulnerable times, should we say. But yeah, I appreciate you being on the show and I hope to speak to you again at some point.
Indeed. Thank you. And stay safe.
Too.